Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. I am thrilled you are here with us today. Our purpose is to share stories, ideas, and tools to help you on your diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. Let's meet this week's guest. Welcome back, listeners. So we've been covering some hot topics, ones we're getting from business leaders in our live interactions with our Ask Me Anything feature that we've been using for live workshops and engagements. And we've been sharing those with our platform, the Leadership Network, with Entrepreneur, the publication. And so I thought, why not bring that content over here? So in this series, we've covered a couple of these, the topics we talked about, best practices, why diversity is important as you grow as a business. Now, this is the one I get a lot, is like inclusive language. So people will say, I don't know, why can't I say that anymore? It feels like all the rules are changing. That's not grammatically correct. So if you struggled with pronouns, if you've struggled with words that are just outdated, quite frankly, why does it feel like everything's changing so quickly? And the truth is, these are words that were probably never good to use, that were exclusionary, that have been addressed. And that's the accountability that comes with diversity, equity, and inclusion work. If the words we're using aren't reflecting what we really mean to say, whether that's an idiom or, a sports analogy or a war metaphor, these things are so commonplace, especially in American culture. And we're not clearly communicating what we mean. And so this isn't just a diversity issue. This is actually like a communication issue. So here's why inclusive leadership, if you want to be an inclusive leader, why inclusive language? It is serious. It is a serious issue. And I think of inclusive language as what a better signal. With my actions, with my words, I choose to be an ally. And because it's easy to say, I want to be an ally, or of course I believe in diversity. It's another thing to do the hard things of updating, kind of like an update on your computer, updating your brain to use better language. And so I'll go through some examples with you and why some language that you're probably using today is problematic and what we can do to switch through it. So this is, again, we'll link to the full article so you can dig in more and just know that this is hard. And I think no one's doing this right, myself included. I still say words that, probably aren't the most inclusive, and I'm working to get better. But as we do this, we grow. And as humans, growth and personal growth is important. And if I think about language, it certainly is one of the biggest signals of culture. So when you think about diversity, diversity is representation. Inclusion, belonging, equity, these are feelings. These are addressing systems. And so inclusion and how we actually set up an inclusive culture, we need to practice using inclusive language. And language shifts over time in society. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Gay was used as a pejorative very often. I'm ashamed that, I participated in that bad behavior. The R word is completely outdated, referring to someone's mental disability, but that was very commonplace. I still hear that word being used. The M word associated with somebody of short stature, for example. And of course, there's very abusive language that I probably don't even need to say, racial slurs, etc. But some of that language, just to say, was very commonplace not too long ago. And I'm going to challenge you to upgrade even further from those words. I'm not going to include those in our lesson today, but just think about the words that were commonplace as you grew up and how it's already shifted for you. So you've already made some adjustments. Hopefully you aren't using those words anymore. And here's some further 2.0 adjustments to consider, if you will. And so I think about inclusive language doesn't mean you're an ally. Okay, so some parameters here. Allyship is about action. Performative allyship is like, hey, I'm reading the book. I listened to this podcast, but taking action using this language is one signal as a part of the overall journey and just one step. And there is no destination, but it has to be done consistently and intentionally over time. And people take notice. So one of the examples I used for my own personal experience was pronouns. So it was several years ago. Thankfully, that conversation is much more progressed since then. But, a few years ago, I was like, why do I need to share my pronouns? I thought to myself, I am a cisgender woman. I identify as a female. I have feminine traits. I was assigned, female on my birth certificate based on my biological sex. So it's obvious. Well, that's not the point. The point is to somebody where their gender identity may not be as obvious, where they might be transgender or gender non-binary, which a substantial part of our population is, that they shouldn't have to do all the work to make sure that they're not misgendered. Okay, so here's a simple thing you can do. One simple action you can take to signal you want to be a better ally on your journey. Add your pronouns to your email signature and your social media accounts. I also do it on my Zoom account. I do it on name badges at events, just anywhere to signal to make it easier. I use she, her pronouns, or I sometimes put she series just to shorten it. You might notice some people use she, they, or he, they. They might have dual gender identities of which they participate in. And so know that here's a mistake we can make too, is calling it preferred pronouns. Pronouns are a part of someone's identity. So it's not a preference. These are my pronouns. So just simply say they are my pronouns. But what I was shocked by adding my pronouns to my email signature, the conversations I had with clients, the things that people shared with me because they knew they can be inclusive in my personal life. Friends of my daughters, their parents would say, oh my gosh, I have a gay son. I know now that I can share that with you. You're a safe place. We've been kicked out of our church. I just couldn't believe the countless stories that were shared with a very, very simple update that I made in a minute or two. And so I think men, I've noticed, especially white, straight, cisgender men, are like, I don't need to add my pronouns. It's not something that happens at work. What do you got to lose? What is the challenge with adding pronouns? Because I've noticed a lot of women do it, a lot of women of color do it, to really show, solidarity with other marginalized communities. So please, you've got nothing to lose. I have yet to see a downside to this behavior. And if there is a downside, I would question the culture of what you're working in. There's very much an upside to this. So aside from pronouns, here's some other words to consider updating in your diversity dictionary. Guys, if you don't believe me about this one, it is a term that has been used historically to describe groups of men. So it has a deep history in male supremacy, not women. It's a big one for me. A simple switch is just saying you all, friends, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen is also problematic. Ladies, that word is quite outdated, and most women feel like it's very condescending to use that word. So I would also strip that one out and just use gender inclusive language that's not gendered at all. It's just all, team, those signal everyone. It doesn't have to be a gendered experience. Minorities. Here's another one that's a bit outdated, is just minor. Right? And you might be thinking, oh, what's the big deal? Well, I don't think I'd want to be called minor, right? Underrepresented, marginalized, those are better words to describe those experiences. Disabled, this is interesting. So just read a really great book, and it again is linked in the article, about person first language. So when we say person with disability, we are embracing them as a full human being that just happens to have a disability, versus calling somebody disabled really limits them to that label and experience. It's hard to see somebody beyond their disability. Now, not everyone feels this way. To call somebody disabled might not offend someone. I just prefer to use person first language to make sure that I'm not offending somebody. Also, saying able-bodied kind of sets the standard of able-bodied being the standard. And when we have a total of 26% of people globally are living with some type of disability, that is problematic, right? So using more inclusive language, persons with disabilities, learning more about neurodiversity, because there is some challenges with lumping in neurodiversity with disability, because rarely are these things apparent, or physical disabilities. So a lot to learn there. Crazy, imagine if you have a mental health challenge or illness, how limiting that language would be. So instead, just say what you actually mean. I use the word wild instead. It's very easy to switch out your language. It took me a few months, but I've gotten rid of that one. Master has a lot of roots in slavery, master code. blacklist versus whitelist. So, main bedroom, main code. We don't need to use master slave language in a business environment. I can't even imagine being a person of color around that kind of conversation. That would feel very dehumanizing. So say what you mean to say. Blind spot. There's actually a book in the diversity world called Blind Spots. Now, this is, think about I call this weak spots now. Because it suggests blind spot is obviously limiting to somebody that has a vision disability and suggests that they are weaker because of it. He or she, just embrace that they is completely okay to use for a singular human being. And so rather than say he or she, boys and girls, men and women, say they. Use more inclusive because gender is a spectrum. It's not binary. And last but not least, idioms. So what I consider here, idioms are just phrases rooted in American culture or the country of origin. They're analogies and metaphors, usually around sports or culture like war, rock star, knock it out of the park, soldiers, battle. This doesn't resonate with people from other cultures. And honestly, it's just not clear language. We don't need to use metaphors to describe what we want to say. Use better language. Rock star, for example, a high performer is probably what we need. And that's probably more valuable to the person to call them that than a rock star, especially if they don't identify with rock music. So just remember, our language does signal our intentions. By being more inclusive with our language, we show people that we really are trying. And that's what this is all about. So just speak, consider removing gendered references, refrain from using culturally centered language that may not land on everybody in a mixed culture group. If you're unsure if the language is inclusive, you just try to find something else to say. Try to find a better way to say it. Just pause, think for a couple of seconds before the words come out of your mouth. And the wrong words come out of your mouth. I say guys occasionally still. I take it back. I meant y'all. I meant team. And when in doubt, research it. Find a trusted resource or friend to ask without the expectation that they are going to educate you, because you can do your own education, and we all need to do a better job of educating ourselves on this topic. So thanks for coming back for Inclusive Language 101. I hope you can update the scripts in your language to signal you want to be a better ally to others. Appreciate any feedback, questions, shoot me a note. You can find my info at nextpivotpoint.com. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you are on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our brand new Lead Like an Ally online program, or get a copy of our new book, Allyship in Action, available on Amazon. Both are helpful tools that meet leaders where they're at and help provide tools for professional and personal settings. Head over to nextpivotpoint.com to get started today.